The poet Mary Oliver tells us you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and deep trees, the mountains and rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. And with these words, we gather to mourn the death and to celebrate the life of James Kenneth Nichols, to Jim, as so many knew him. So in this sacred time together, we will hear stories of Jim's life, listen to inspirational readings and music that evoke his life. Most importantly, several of you who knew him well will share your personal reflections, your memories of Jim, and how he impacted your lives. Now, in this unfortunate time of pandemic, we are sorry that not everybody can join us. We are glad, though, to have many joining us online, as well as those who are here in our sanctuary. We would, of course, have given Jim a different kind of memorial had this pandemic not interfered. But we take this opportunity nonetheless to remember and to honor his life well. So we'll begin with a few facts about Jim, and it's not that Jim's life can be summed up in some brief bio. We could never reduce his 74 years on this earth to a single hour. But with this context, we have a starting point so that the deeper and more personal sharing that will come in a few moments can be fit into the larger setting of his life. His is a life that began in 1947, January 10th, in Lake Charles. His parents saw him into the world and raised him, James and Emily. Both now are deceased, but they're far from the whole of his family. They include his brother Joseph, and later Joseph's husband, Philip Mayu. Eventually, they included his children, James Carter Nichols and Sarah Nichols Cooley, along with their mother, Dr. Candace Carr. There's also his niece, Emma, with her husband and children, many cousins and other relatives, and of course, Jim's grandchildren, Carson and Hudson, along with their father, J.J. Cooley. Now, I should add that all of Jim's family live out of town, and initially many of them had planned to attend today, but with the perils of travel during this pandemic surge, many of them decided not to make that journey. We are glad that several of them are joining us online, though we do have one member of the family here, and I'll say more about that in just a moment. But much of Jim's life was lived in the town of DeRidder, from his high school studies in the early and mid-1960s to his legal career, his service on the parish school board, and as city prosecutor, attorney, and judge there. The final third of his life, about 25 years, was lived here in Baton Rouge, and particularly included his involvement in the Multiple Sclerosis Society, in Business Networking International, and in this church, the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge, where he was a member for many years. Now, in our church, in most all Unitarian churches, we have a tradition of marking our collective entry into sacred time together by the lighting of a flame in a chalice. The flaming chalice is the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, and it's our tradition to invite a member of the family to participate, and we're pleased that we have Jim's son, James Carter Nichols. And James, I invite you to come forward and light the chalice. Those who are members of the church, as he does so, there's a candle just below. As he does so, we'll invite you to say the words that we traditionally say. With hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is a symbol of the power of love. Now let us hear a hymn. A reading from the poet Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Well, as mentioned earlier, we do have people to share their stories Jim, and we'll have them join us both in person, and in one case of somebody who could not be with us physically, we have a video of their recorded reflections on Jim's life. But we'll start with some people who are with us who have connections with him through this church, and then hear from a couple of others afterwards. So at this time, I invite Dottie Kelly to come forward, with Ron Juneau to follow her.
When Jim Nichols first walked into the church in 2013, he was a little slower than you or I might have been because he was being assisted by a metal walker. I approached him and we chatted, the usual welcoming. And as I was leading him into the church, I said, "I'm a retired nurse, and before you leave here, I want us to adjust that walker so it fits you and you'll be more comfortable." He laughed, and that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. He was not super sensitive about the fact that he had lost some of his capacity due to this horrible MS. He could accept help graciously and sometimes ask for help. He was put into my life too late for me to know what he was like before, so I appreciated hearing what Eric read about him, but it was my loss. Coping is what Jim did best. He extracted every drop of goodness and happiness and friendship from every day and every hour and every situation. In our church, as many of you know, we have the small group ministry called Branches. And Jim and I and Dave were members of the same Branches group. After he moved to Heritage House, we actually moved our meeting to Heritage House. Jim would make the arrangements with the facility for our monthly meetings, and he enjoyed being host to us all. He pushed the envelope of all the physical therapy that was available to him to continue to be able to take part in activities of the church and other parts of his life here in Baton Rouge. Everyone in our group was influenced by his generous friendship. He has been my role model of perseverance and good cheer. I looked forward to my visits with him as much for me as for him, because he and I both enjoyed talking about our families, mine in Mississippi and his in Louisiana. And he was so patient with my long, drawn-out yarns about people that he would never know, never see, but he knew that it was important to me, and he let me ramble. I loved him more for that on reflection, for his patience, and realized that we truly supported each other. You can add unselfish and generous to the litany of qualities that there are to admire about him. We all know the adage, when life hands you lemons, make lemonade. Well, those of us who shared Jim's lemonade will always be refreshed by it.
Thank you, Dottie. Ron, and then Dave Bickmeyer will follow him.
I first met Jim at the church in the fellowship hall, which is the room beyond the breezeway, where we have coffee and snacks after the service on Sundays. I don't know when Jim's MS, that is, his multiple sclerosis, started in his life. But I think I remember that he was, but as Dottie had a different version there, I think I remember that he was using only a cane to get around, or maybe he was walking unassisted when I first met him in the fellowship hall some years ago. Sounds like from what Dottie just said, it was in 2013. But upon first meeting Jim, we immediately hit it off with our common enthusiasm for sports and especially politics. Jim was still driving his car at that time. Things got progressively worse for Jim with the MS, and after several years he had to use a wheelchair, but still occasionally came to church, and we continued our conversations in the fellowship hall and also after church with the church lunch bunch group on Sunday afternoons. Jim eventually became a resident at Heritage Manor Nursing Home located off Jefferson Highway, not far from Jefferson Baptist Church. I regret that I didn't visit Jim more often than I did when he was at Heritage Manor. But when I did, we always had long, enjoyable conversations about sports and politics in the patio area of the facility. After a few years at Heritage Manor, Jim and the people in his nursing home were moved to a brand new long-term care facility that is Landmark South Nursing and Rehabilitation Center on Jefferson Highway near Bayou Manchac. I visited Jim a lot more often at the new facility, and eventually I became a member of Jim's branches group. The facility became closed to visitors due to COVID-19 in March 2020, and of course was closed for a very long time after that. Jim never complained about his situation with MS or being a resident in a nursing home, and later even when he caught COVID-19. Visitors were finally allowed back to Jim's facility, but for just a few weeks, and then was shut down again due to a new COVID outbreak in the facility. But when the facility reclosed, I did have phone conversations with Jim, and his voice sounded, even then, sounded strong, and as always, cheerful. I will always remember Jim for his cheerfulness, no matter what his situation was. Although I knew Jim was in deteriorating health near the end of his life, I was still shocked when I found out that Jim had died. Thank you.
Jim and I met, as Dottie said, at the branches right back here. And I still remember Dottie had said something. I have no idea what it was. But Jim and I both came out simultaneously, perfect unison. We couldn't have done it better if we'd practiced it for weeks. With the same irreverent comment, whatever it was. We got a good laugh out of it. Everyone else did. It was a good sign that our brains were kind of wired together, and we kind of hit it off that night. We're good friends right up through this spring. We saw each other a couple times a week, sometimes more, and we'd run errands together. We'd go to restaurants. He liked good food. He loved music. We'd go to the Red Dragon. Wes had it set up so we could get him in a wheelchair and get him in the back. And so we passed a number of nice evenings there. Branches, yeah, we did. Branches, Jim finally became one of the group leaders within Branches, and he ran his own group over there first in Heritage Manor and then later at Landmark. We did Red Dragon whenever we could. One memorable evening, we had been there to see Rambling Jack Elliott, and we always were in the back. We would let the crowd clear before we left because of Jim's wheelchair. Mr. Elliott came back. We started talking Jim and Ramblin' Jack, and I think there was Steve Giudice, the local songwriter, and Wes came back, and a few other people. Well, a bottle appeared somewhere out of the crowd, and an hour or two later, Jim and Ramblin' Jack were still trading stories and just having the time of their lives. And it was an interesting challenge getting him back out of there and into the truck and getting him home that day. So he passed a good time when it was offered to him. He really did. The branches meetings were always fun out at the groups, and we always took snacks, and our topics always started off at a very high level, but like Ron said, they always degenerated into sports and politics, so it was just the way it was. But I saw Jim fairly often. When the COVID hit, we weren't face to face, but I got him a bird feeder, and we would talk quite frequently. He liked seltzer water, and I would make a run every so often and drop off a couple of cases of seltzer water, check with him on the phone or Facebook. And this spring, when they opened the restrictions, we were able to get together the last few times for some 30-minute visits. And I was struck when I heard about his death, because when his first major crisis after I knew him, he was near death in the lake, and I was sitting in the room and he was hallucinating. And later we talked about that, and he related a tale. He said he had a hallucination that he was somewhere way up above the room looking down, and he could see himself in the bed having hallucinations, and he saw me sitting there, and he had a decision to make, and he said either he went on to sleep. He was very sleepy and tired, and he said, well, I either had to decide to go on to sleep or get up and get going again. And he said, I decided to get up and get going again, and he did. He was up for some years after that. And I heard about the death in the spring, and I just, to myself, I thought, well, he's decided to go to sleep.
I am honored to be here to share my memory and what Jim meant to me. And I just so hope that Cammie or Steve are not on either side of me for this time together, because they're much funnier than I'm probably going to be. But I first met Jim, I think it was 2006, maybe 2005. I was in a room and I nudged a girl next to me and I said, ooh, Beth, who's that charming man on the other side? And she says, oh, that's Jim, you're gonna love him. And I did. I love Jim dearly, and I was smitten with Jim, but not smitten in the way that y'all all might be thinking. I just absolutely, with Jim, he had such personality, and he was so charming, and he also had this way about him with his personality to tell a story. And so Jim and I, that was the first meeting, Jim and I ran over there, and I said, I'm Meredith, who are you? And he started laughing. He said, well, I'm Jim Nichols. And it was from then on, we became just fast friends. And we figured that we had been through some similar journeys together, and we had that bond. We both had known what it was like to make a few mistakes in our life, and we had that connection. And so Jim and I would meet, and it was during the days that I used to enjoy wine, and we would sit and talk and visit, and he became fast friends with my dad. And then one day, just out of the blue, Jim drove up to my home, and he just stopped in. You know, Jim, it was okay if Jim Nichols stopped in to visit, because that's what he was. He was a storyteller with just fabulous history knowledge. And he came in, and I could tell he was troubled. And I said, Jim, well, this isn't normal. What's up, buddy? And he said, well, Meredith, I've got cancer, and I've got a tumor, and I've got to have surgery. And I said, well, you got this. It'll be fine. You'll be back up in no time. And he said, well, Meredith, I don't know where I'm going to go to convalesce. And my dad and I looked at each other and we said, well, you're going to come here. And so Jim spent a couple weeks in my home. And for those of you that know me, I'm probably more like Nurse Ratchet than I am like Nurse Nancy. But between my dad and I, we figured it out. And so I was very humbled to have been able to be with Jim during that time. And our friendship grew from there. And just simply put, Jim made me want to be a better person. Jim, I used to use the term personality, grace, and charm. And Jim taught me what personality, grace, and charm was all about. And so I will miss my dear friend. I care deeply for him. And he really taught me how to be a better person. And so, Jim, I know you and my dad are up there telling political stories, and that warms my heart because our family loves you, and I will always love you.
Our thanks to Meredith Eicher for sharing those reflections. And one final reflection from Cammie Miller.
Jim wasn't my friend. Jim was my good friend. And I know many of you will relate to that. We have many friends, but we have a few good friends. I met Jim, it must have been around 2007, early 2008, through BNI, and we were business buddies. And we became fast friends very quickly. We would share books. We would sit and talk philosophy, science, politics, and just connected in a way that, and talked about things that you just can't talk about with just anybody. So when Jim's MS started to ravage his body, I said, Jim, get a cane, man. I'm worried you're gonna fall. Nah, he'd say, I'm good. Jim, you need a cane or a walker. Nah, I'm okay. So imagine my surprise when one day he walks into BNI with a cane. I'm like, oh, Jim, I'm so glad you have that cane because I was so worried you were gonna fall. And in Jim's way, he said, oh, I'm not using this because I might fall. I'm not worried about that. He said, but I figured out that when I would stagger around a store in a parking lot, people thought I was drunk. So I'm using this so they know I'm not drunk. I said, however reason you're using it, I'm glad. Jim had a way about him that just made you smile. You know, he treasured his family. Carter, I can't tell you the number of times Jim would talk about you. And Jim had a way of sharing each person's accomplishments and good things. And I'd go visit him in the nursing home, and like many of us, not nearly as much as I think I should have, but when I'd visit, he'd say, come walk with me. And we'd go down to the gym, and he'd do his rehab while we visited. And people kind of gravitated just to be around Jim, see who was visiting. And he would always introduce them and was always very positive about that person, always shared something that impressed him about each of those people. No wonder they wanted to be around him so much. You know, he took the losses that his disease created in him with such grace and such stride, except for one time. There was an incident at the nursing home, and they decided that they had to stop serving hot coffee. And that was not well accepted. He ranted on Facebook. That was just unconscionable. Because there's two things Jim believed. One was that everybody worth anything came from DeRitter, and the other was that a man needs hot coffee. I think eventually he sorted it out, either came to peace with it or figured out a way to get his hot coffee, although I brought him some one time because I figured he wasn't going to make it if he didn't have a cup of hot coffee. Normally, I just sneak chocolate and wine into him, but every once in a while, I had to bring him coffee, too. You know, Jim, I think, touched everyone. And I think it was because he saw the best in everyone. When I would bring him a bottle of wine, he'd show it to his roommate and he'd say, "We're going to share this later." And I think that's how he stayed out of trouble. But wherever he is now, it is my hope that he's playing golf with the best score he ever scored, and then he's able to listen to music whenever he wants. And there's a beautiful, well-trained bird dog by his side, because I believe for Jim, that would be heaven.
My thanks to all those who shared their stories, to Dottie, to Ron, to Dave, to Meredith for joining us from afar, and to Cammie as well. Thank you. As a newer minister serving this church, I did not have the opportunity to know Jim the way you did, and these reflections offer a depth to our remembrance that cannot be added in quite the same way. And yet, I'm struck, as I have been at times in the past, by the fact that sometimes when preparing for a memorial service, even for someone I did not have the privilege of knowing, there's a resonance, a connection that can be found. And one of the things I learned about Jim that I discovered that he and I shared in common is a great love and affinity for a particular musician, singer, and songwriter, Leonard Cohen. Many of you recognize the piece we just heard as Cohen's often covered song, Hallelujah. And I've been struck over the years at what an insightful spiritual writer that he could be as well. So someone who faced challenges in his life and at the same time faced life with charm and with an engagement and willingness to share a story, as we've just heard. It resonates that Cohen would be someone whose work he would resonate with. I name all this to note that one of the things I don't know about Jim is how much of a praying person he was, or how comfortable he would be with prayer. But I find that when we gather to remember someone, some time of deeper reflection is meaningful. But I invite us to do that in a slightly different way this time. I do have some prayerful words to share, but they are not my own. These are words by Leonard Cohen. They're actually the lyrics of one of his songs that was on the same album as Hallelujah, as it happens. But they are also very much a prayer. So I invite us into that time of deeper sharing, that time of reaching deep within, reaching far beyond yourself, and connecting with that which you know to be sacred. If it be your will that I speak no more, and my voice be still, as it was before, I will speak no more. I shall abide until I am spoken for, if it be your will. And if it be your will that a voice be true, then from this broken hill I will sing to you. From this broken hill all your praises they shall ring, if it be your will to let me sing. Amen.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
as we often do here at this church, I invite you to join in a litany of remembrance. I'll say several passages and invite you to respond to each one with the phrase, "We will remember him." In the rising of the sun, in the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember him. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we will remember him. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we will remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember him. In the stories we tell, in the music we hear, we will remember him. When we share our love, we will remember him. So long as we live, he too shall live, and we will remember him. I want to add a note about the complexity of the grief that we might experience and the many ways we might experience it, including how those are exacerbated and made stranger by this pandemic and its circumstances, including the fact that it forced us to postpone this memorial until a couple of months after Jim's passing. There is no one way to grieve, of course, and the grief will vary based on our interactions with Jim, who was clearly in many ways a good person and also a human being with his flaws as well as his strengths, as in differing ways we all are. For some of us, the memories will be almost purely joyful, worth treasuring, easy to remember, and easy to miss his presence. Others may have had a more complex relationship with him and may find your emotions more complex as well. This too is authentic and honors the fullness of his life and is not something to run away from. So whatever difficult or heartwarming feelings may come to you as you remember Jim's presence in your life, I hope you can have opportunity to dwell with those memories, with those feelings, to share them as appropriate with people who can help you carry that complexity or simplicity, as it may be. For this is how Jim's life impacts us, and it is the kind of measured immortality that we offer to others in our remembrance of them after their presence has faded from our lives in a direct sense. Because Jim Nichols' body has now given all that it can. And it allowed him to journey on this earth for 74 years. Some of those years with limitations, yes, but as we heard so clearly, journeying on still. And so many of our worlds were more engaging and livelier because he existed. But his body has now been given over to the transformations that face us all after our life on this planet has ended. So while his physical presence with us has come to its end, his impact will live on through you. Now, we'll share one final hymn and then some words of benediction to conclude. A quick note about this hymn. I understand it was a favorite of Jim's, and it's one that is very familiar to members of this church. For others, it will likely not be familiar, though you might recognize the tune. It was used with other hymns, but it is one which shares the beauty and the goodness of creation, which is all around us and of which we are a part, of which Jim too was a part. So let us hear it now.
Though below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known, the wide universe is my ocean, my travel, and to you this my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I climb the sorry sea, leaning over the edge and wander, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, praise the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known, the wide universe is the ocean I travel, and to you this my blue boat home.
These concluding words from the poet May Sarton. Did someone say that there would be an end, oh, an end to love and mourning? Such voices speak when sleep and waking blend, the cold, bleak voices of the early morning when all the birds are dumb in dark November. Remember and forget, forget, remember. After the false night, warm, true voices wake, voice of the dead that touches the cold living. Through the pale sunlight, once more gravely speak. Tell me again, while the last leaves are falling, dear child, what has once been so interwoven cannot be raveled, nor the gift ungiven. Now the dead move through us all, still glowing. Mother and child, lover and lover mated, are wound and bound together and inflowing. What has been plated cannot be unplated. Only the strands grow richer with each loss, and memory makes kings and queens of us. Dark into light, light into darkness spin, when all the birds have flown to some real haven. We who find shelter in the warmth within, listen and feel new cherished, new forgiven. As the lost human voices speak through us and blend our complex love, our mourning without end. And so we mourn, and so we celebrate, and so we remember Jim. We thank you for joining with us and bid you go in peace.